right thing. I married the girl. This was 1958, Missoula, Montana. I'm 17 years old. My father, the judge, was not pleased, and we were exiled to Denver. Fast forward to the summer of love, 1969. I've got 2 kids. I've got a wife, an ambitious wife, who I never really did want. My father's got his track all laid out for me. I've got a bachelor's degree, I've got a master's degree, I've got a law degree, and I'm looking at studying for the bar, and I'm looking at a cage for the rest of my life. I heard the message, Tim Leary, tune in, turn on, tune in, drop out. Now, the turning on part was taken care of by one of my law professors who was fresh from Berkeley, who gave me some LSD, which basically opened me up like a piñata. And I was a very, very uptight, non-artistic, ambitious young man. I looked more like an FBI agent than an artist. I tuned in the form of starting to smoke dope regularly and often, and entered a kind of bubble of selfishness where it was okay to do my own thing. It was okay to, my life was my own. I got to do what I wanted. And come my birthday, 1969, I dropped out and basically disappeared for 3 years and went to the country, to a rural place in Colorado mountains, Colorado Rocky Mountain High, and I took the wife of the law professor with me. Together we went back to the land. I really was trying to become a third world peasant and uneducate myself. But in the meantime, with all, taking those drugs, I did about 400 drawings. In computer language, you could say I did a core dump. I just absolutely dumped my subconscious out onto paper. It turns out I was pretty good at it, in the sense that I was able to clearly and vividly and powerfully document psychiatric states. And I produced a volume of drawings that I still have in ammunition cans that nobody ever gets to see, but which I'm convinced will someday make me very famous. At the end of the 3 years, and I had really no contact with my family much, it's now time to show the hippie, long-haired hippie artist. And I went back to my hometown in Missoula, Montana, and that's how I was doing. That's what I looked like. My father, by this time, had become a federal judge, and he's busy in the courthouse sentencing people to jail for not going to Vietnam. And I'm out on the street with my welding torch, cutting tin cans into candle holders and butterflies and sun faces, and selling these to whoever would buy them. And I started doing art shows and traveled around Montana doing these art shows, which were very common and plentiful in the 70s. If I were going to announce a topic for my talk tonight, I would describe it as the difference between doing art on drugs and doing art without drugs. And what the drugs did for me, and especially the marijuana, was created a bubble that protected me and gave me permission to do something that was contrary to my inhibitions, contrary to my common sense, and contrary to my intuition. Marijuana separated my head from the rest of me, and I could live in this little fantasy and project all of my wondrous stuff and just play to my heart's content. And if I wanted to do it, I did it. If I liked it, I did it, basically without reference to anyone else. very narcissistic and really quite selfish. This also blocked the guilt and shame I was packing around for having abandoned my family and abandoned my parents. Shortly after doing these art shows for a while, I needed something more significant because I was destined, I had a big ambition, and I wanted to be powerful, and I wanted to be important. And Isabel asked for a turning point in the process, and at a garage sale, and this was Montana, somebody was selling a little .25 caliber automatic handgun. They used to call them Saturday night specials. And I looked at that and I thought, that looks like a motor. And I proceeded to start to build sculptural cars that were basically hidden concealed weapons. And I ended up over a period of time doing 17 of these. And you can show the car now. This is probably the best one. There were two that were really, really good, and there were a bunch of them that were really mediocre. But the notion here is that, of course, I was living a life, I'm illegal all the time because I'm doing drugs. And a lot of paranoia and a lot of fear and a lot of anger from the way my life was going. So here we've got the slick outside, the socially acceptable outside, and inside we have a gun. So these things are still functional. The trigger, the gear shift is the trigger. When you fire it, smoke comes out the exhaust pipe. The bumper, which you can't see in this picture, you pull the bumper to cock the slide, and the bullet comes out the crank hole in the front. So I was surprised that people didn't want to buy these. I mean, people were very impressed with them, but they kind of, they didn't want to buy them, and I got attention. I got magazine articles and newspapers and stuff, but nobody wanted to buy them, and they ended up basically going into the closet. So fast forward, come up around 1985, and I was doing these into the 90s, actually into the 80s and 90s, but in 1985 I actually got a job. I ended up going to work for 20th Century Fox as a computer programmer, and I did that from 1985 through 2005. And I'd smoke dope now and then, but I wasn't doing a lot of it. And I'd drink, but I wasn't doing a lot of it. And still tinkering on the gun cars. This one was finished in 2005. I retired in 2005 and immediately started smoking dope again. And when I started smoking dope, the art came back, and I started doing wood carving. And I was doing wood carving and pottery and whatnot. And again, it wasn't really acceptable. A lot of it was kind of sexy and, and in one way or another, stuff that people really didn't want to have in their living room. And then in 2009, my daughter, who was the daughter that I was introduced into marriage with, she's 50 years old, hanged herself. And I adored her. And she had trouble with drugs and alcohol. And when that happened, it was like a landmine going off in my feet, and it erased me, basically. And in a flash, I saw, Russell, it's time you stood up on your hind legs and you walked through the balance of your life without drugs, because you were unable to help your children because you didn't know what it was like to be straight. So I did that assuming that I would never do art again, because I had never done art without drugs, and I assumed that if I didn't have drugs, I would not be able to do art. But I was willing not to do art if that was what it took. About 2 years later, I'm flipping around in eBay, and I stumble across, this is another one of Isabel's turning points. I found a little gun that looked like a motor. Now I find a wind-up motor from an antique phonograph. And it just went click. I could use that motor to power kinetic sculptures. So I bought some of these antique phonograph motors, and I started making mechanical sculptures based on them. And I spent 3 years making a series of pieces, all of them on a 3-foot tall stand, 1-inch square pedestal, or 1-foot square pedestal, and they're like 12 inches wide, like this tall, these mechanical sculptures. So you can show the mechanical sculpture. There's the gentleman who took that picture is in the audience tonight, which kind of surprises me. So the motor there is from a Sears and Roebuck phonograph about 1918, and what's up on top is a gear head, and this is a piece I'm kind of doing a lot of them now, or not a lot because it takes 6 weeks or 8 weeks to make one. But all those gears are handmade. I cut the gears myself. I make all the parts myself. So what I'm trying to do is I make a machine that looks like a machine, it runs like a machine, but it's got this wobble and this unevenness in it, which gives it kind of an organic life. So it's like an organic machine. Essentially, what the difference now is that when I'm out of that drug bubble and I've got my gut intuition and my intelligence, I've got my core intelligence now, it's all united. Suddenly other people become real, and I'm no longer making concealed weapons. I'm no longer standing at this hateful relationship, in a sense, with my audience. And so now, but however, in the course of that, I learned the mechanical skills and the metalworking skills necessary to make mechanical art through making the gun cars. So now I turn that to another use, and I'm now making mechanical pieces that people are actually willing to invite into their lives. And it's the difference between art as making love and art as doing that other thing. That's all I've got.